That's
Hello,
fine.
everyone. If you've just joined us, we've just gone live, and I'm really pleased to have with us. Actually, I don't know if the stream's going live yet. It's weird because of the latency. Let's see. I'm looking at it on my phone. Yep, it does look like we are live now.
Great.
Uh, Good to see you, Darrell.
Nice
Wonderful.
to see you, Creston. How's it going?
It's going well. You look great and have a smile on your face. I'm sure for a reason that I can probably guess, or at least one of maybe many reasons why you have a smile on your face. Anyway, it's good to see you. And you're in Miami, or just north of Miami, I understand. Is that right?
Well, it's for all in. I'm actually one half a block north of Miami Beach. So the
Oh,
town
wow.
municipality I live in is called Surfside.
Okay.
So it's all the metro area, and
Wow.
it's a
That's
little municipality with about 5,000 to 6,000 people. But it's all part of the city, so you're not isolated by anything.
I remember
Water on
visiting.
both sides.
Yeah, I can see. I really like that. I remember there's a long strip that you can drive all the way down to South Beach, and
Yeah, where
I
I'm
don't know what the name of that road is, but it's a beautiful drive.
Yeah. Well, there's Harding Avenue going one way and Collins coming up the other. At some point they join. That's
Okay,
yeah, that's where I am.
wonderful. I'd like to welcome those of you who are watching, and feel free to chat a question or a comment in the chat. We'll keep that monitored. And I'm really pleased to have with me today, a friend. And I've known you, Darrell, for, I don't know, maybe 8 years, something like that, a good
Yeah,
while. And
right.
we've worked together on some projects, especially centered around GCAS and the Global Center for Advanced Studies. And that's been wonderful. And got to know Andrew Feenberg, the pretty preeminent philosopher, through you, actually. And so that's been great. Well, I'd like to just briefly introduce you, Darrell. And Darrell, apart from being a friend of mine, he's an educator, philosopher, theorist of technology, who also writes his own songs, performs them, one of which we might hear today, I hope, and actually is can be seen regularly, I think, in the Miami area. What bar is that you and Sarah?
Yeah, I have a kind of a regular gig over at the Luna Star Cafe, which has been, I don't know, the house for singer-songwriters out of the Miami area, folk acoustic music for 20 some odd years. And Sarah I'm married to a musician and a philosopher as well. And we both play over there once a month. We have a gig. So
Yeah, I see your post on Facebook, and I'm just jealous that I can't get down there or haven't been yet. And so it's been, I don't know, maybe 5, 6 years since I've been to Miami. Amazing.
Well,
Um,
it's one of those places that that all communities need, that have a forum for people who write their own music, who want to get out and perform. I mean, in addition to being a regular venue for singer-songwriters out of the area and folk acoustic performers, they have a regular open mic that gives people the opportunity to hone their craft, go out and perform a few songs for people, to do some poetry and things like this. Miami isn't known as a city that has a strong civic center, but one of the things every city needs are venues like that give people an opportunity to come together, to exchange ideas, to perform works of art, and so on. And so we're very happy to be very tightly interwoven into that community, and to be some of the people who help bring live music to the city. And we actually run one of the open mics per month as well.
okay,
Yeah.
nice. Nice. And I know Sarah, your wife, that you just spoke about, is from the UK, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. She grew up in the London, north of London.
Okay,
Kent.
nice. Yeah, and like Luna Star, here when I'm in London in Soho, the high end club, the one with the pinky in the air, was the Groucho Club. But if you just go across the street, just a couple of feet away from the Groucho Club, there's a club called Blacks, and this is sort of the anti-Groucho club, and it's quite full of culture and different kinds of arts and that anyway. So that's here in London, which of course we're in lockdown here, so we
Right.
can't frequent places like that now until I don't know, a couple more weeks. But have you heard of any lockdowns in Miami? Does
Well,
such a thing exist in the U.S.?
uh, well, we had lockdowns. All the restaurants had been closed for a period of time. They opened back up a little bit under the pressure of the president and of our governor. But with these rising cases, we're kind of not sure what's going to happen. I mean, there's been a loosening up. There was a mask rule, maybe not always enforced, but it had a great effect, actually. They reduced the daily case numbers and the time that they had this lockdown and the mask ordinance from about little over 8,000 a day in this city. No,
Wow.
yeah. Or is that Florida? I think that must be under 3,000.
Okay, yeah, but
We're talking
still,
Florida. But
that's
now it's rising again, so we're back up around 6,000 a day, and I think that's with underreporting. We have a push. I teach at Miami-Dade College, which is was for a long time, I think, the largest on-ground college in the United States.
wow.
And that we've been teaching remotely. We've phased back into partial face-to-face, but
Yeah.
with technology. So I basically only have one student who comes to any of my given face-to-face classes. The rest can join with video chat if they want to. And that's what I've encouraged them to do and what they've done. But
Okay.
they have plans to open up for the following semester with no mask rule and all of this kind of stuff. I'm assuming maybe with these rising numbers, they're going to come to their senses,
Yeah.
not turn into some kind of a COVID death camp.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Well, I actually have a close friend of mine who is just up further north of you in Fort Lauderdale who just got COVID and she's recovering. And of course, one of our PhD students deceased from COVID back in March, Walter South. And he and his spouse have been amazing supporters of GCAS. Anyway, it's an interesting time here in London. It's very different in the UK than it is in France, where in France you have to actually fill out a piece of paper or an app that if you're going to go outside your house, and if the police will stop you, and they do, and you don't have your declaration, they can find you. And if the second time you can potentially go to jail. So it's much less rigid here in the UK than lockdown is in France. But of course, in the US, it's like, I don't know, it's a strange thing. And anyway, but
Yeah.
these are strange times. And I wonder if you had any insights from your perspective as an educator and also as an activist and a musician. I mean, you do so many things. I'd love to get into how your life ended up this way, that's a really interesting topic. But I wonder if you have any general, and maybe this is too premature, but general ideas about being an educator, a musician in a pandemic. I mean, these are strange times. So love to get into that conversation.
They are strange times. And, I'm a philosophy professor. So, and I've been teaching philosophy now for 15 years, I guess, full time again. I had a stint as an editor and a translator in Germany where I did my doctorate, but I've been back here in the States now for, since 2007, teaching full time at various institutions. And, I've always found it a little bit of a struggle to teach critical thinking, given, I think, the assault that's long-term from the right on facts, on fact-based reasoning. And in the COVID virus and then under the Trump presidency, I found it very challenging to teach just basic critical thinking skills. It's hard to find agreement in classrooms about what is a good source of news information. And so, and how do you do this then without, I don't know, appearing dogmatic and like you're teaching people what to think, which is the last thing I want to do. I don't want to teach people what to think, but there's a little intersect between teaching people what to think and how to think, a little bit, you know. And one of the things that you can't, if you're a thinker, you just have to recognize that Breitbart is often very unreliable. You can do fact checks on what the on their accuracy,
Yes.
and you find they're quite inaccurate quite often. And
Yeah.
you can compare that to the New York Times, which in the news writing of the New York Times, when they're factually wrong, they come up with a statement basically to admit that. But I tell you right now, and it's not new. I mean, this has been going on since Newt Gingrich in some senses.
Yeah.
But it's particularly acute in the Trump era, where we have bald-faced lying every day, supported by a Department of Justice that's happy to participate in bald-faced lying, supported by Secretary of State or whoever. They're all willing to go down this road of bald-faced lies. And I mean, I live in Florida, where we have Rubio and Scott, both who deny climate change. That's actually in the song that I'm going to play for you a little bit later, right? These guys deny climate change. I mean, how do you try to convince students of this reality that they're seeing when they go out to South Beach at high tide during the king tide, because the water is now a foot high sometimes, when 10 years ago it wasn't?
Yeah.
Well, it's all very, these are distant causes. They're hard things to see, but there's consensus around it. The problem we have had in the United States is Koch brothers and, Koch Foundation, the DeVos family, and many other of these folks who are big, important people in the Republican Party have been funding disinformation campaigns for 40 years.
Yeah.
And it's working. And so how do you, as an educator, try to get people to think critically when they're already, from the news outlets, from the news media, from their families, so convinced of they're so disinformed.
Yes.
And I tell you, it's a real struggle.
I can imagine. And I mean, I'd love to get down and dirty in the conversation about post-truth and the trends there. But I hear a little accent in your voice. It sounds to me like you're from maybe the South or the Texas area. Where are you?
No, I don't know. I'm not sure what accent you're hearing, but I'm from Nebraska.
Nebraska.
That's where, that's the place where we speak very standard American English. But
that's true. It doesn't have much of an accent in Nebraska.
Lived a lot of different places. I don't know what wears off on me. Maybe
you grow up as
Miami accent becomes, the world accent.
Yeah, that's true too. Did you grow up as a Cornhusker fan? Football, like the standard?
I did. Yeah. There's no getting around that. I mean, there's virtually no getting around that. But I haven't been interested. Thank God that hasn't interested me for years, because if it had continued to interest me, I would be suffering, because wow, that was quite a football legacy that has become quite a
yes.
And
I understand that, and I grew up in Pennsylvania as a Penn State fan, and I agree with you in that. But so where in Nebraska did you grow up, and what made you ever fall into becoming an educator, a philosopher? How did that go?
Okay. Yeah, so I mean, I grew up in North Platte, Nebraska, a city which is known for the fact that Buffalo Bill lived there for 26 years, I believe. And so it's one stop on I-80 through town, Buffalo Bill Scouts Restaurant. For that, some people stop and gasoline, and maybe a rodeo in the summer. Yeah. But, my parents were rural Nebraskans, grew up in very small towns with about 300 or so people. I was in the fourth largest city in Nebraska, which had, I don't know, I think to this day has about 30,000 people. So,
wow, that's really
it's rural Nebraska, and very conservative, actually. So I grew up Catholic, and I went to McDade Elementary School, a Catholic school. And, thinking back on that is interesting these days because I'm 56. So it was in 19, I don't know, during the McGovern-Nixon election, there was a mock election at our grade school. And of the 52 Catholic kids in that school, 50 voted for Nixon.
Wow.
These are not your Pennsylvania Catholics. Two voted for McGovern. So my father was a union guy in the post office, and I was one of the McGovern supporters.
Yeah.
Now all those people are Trump supporters, and they have the same kind of blind allegiance, and it doesn't matter. The fraud doesn't matter. The breaking of laws is irrelevant. The worst thing for the country is to have a Democrat in the House, and so we'll accept any criminality on the part of a Republican as long as he's a Republican. He has my allegiance, and it's just the same thing playing out 40 years later with the folks who I was in grade school with.
One thing that's incredulous to me is that, and you mentioned the Nixon era, is how can someone like a Nixon do basically what he did as a conspiracy, even a treasonous act, as the president, and get booted and not have the Republicans sort of have their wake up to the reality of, maybe this is systemic within Republican Party or within a conservative strain that dominates the political scene in the United States. And that to me was always puzzling. And someone like a Jimmy Carter came in, and I remember the Carter coming in. Of course, my family was very conservative, unlike yours, or didn't my background. And so Carter was always the weak president or something like this. And so, so your dad was in the union in the post office. So I wonder if you have any insights about the recent postal. Would you call it a scandal about how that happened and how the ballots were purposefully slowed down from being delivered?
Yeah, I mean, I would find that a scandal. And I mean, I really didn't answer your last question about how I got to philosophy from all of that.
That's true.
Somehow my own personal story is maybe less intriguing to me than talking about.
But I want to hear how a Nebraska.
I'm happy, but from that Midwestern conservative town, basically, I don't know. I was Catholic. I had the early drug problems that a lot of kids in rural areas have, where there's basically nothing to do but pump yourself full of dope, and kind of overcoming that, I became quite religious, and I was Catholic, so I wanted to be a monk. So I actually went and I studied at a monastery for a couple of years, a Benedictine monastery, and in some ways that was, I mean, it was that whole strain of thought. And I think sometimes religious thought is that it's a challenge to the status quo materialism of the culture, right? So, I mean, one way to do that is through politics. And I already, at 16 or something, I understood myself as some democratic socialist, but basically my life, my challenge to that was to I guess the consumer society was maybe to consider a life of interiority and,
like a Thomas Merton
at a monastery. Yeah, I read Thomas Merton and so on. Later, I went to Kentucky, and I actually went regularly to the monastery where Thomas Merton had been a monk, and I had a spiritual director there. So I was quite Catholic, but I was Catholic and studying philosophy at the same time. And what happened to me was basically I untithed myself from the dogma continuously, and basically have ended up pretty much, basically an agnostic who finds some benefit to, I don't know, practices of interiority or Zen meditation or something like that. But that's kind of the trajectory. And it was, because of having these Ursuline sisters and these priests in the hometown that I kind of, in some sense, was glad I had the religious experience that I did as a Catholic, as opposed to some kind of a Pentecostal, because, at least, not that there wouldn't be a third alternative that would be better, which is like secular enlightened parents. Okay, but of those things, you have you have some kind of depth of thought within that tradition. Folks like Thomas Merton, who are very interesting figures to look at, and I think that I don't know. Anyway, that played a role in my own life.
How
And
did you end up in
I love
Germany?
my parents, by the way, so I didn't mean for that to.
Of course, of course. How did you end up in Germany doing a PhD?
Yeah, so I mean, from that, I was studying then philosophy. I left that monastery after 2 years, and I went to a Catholic college. And I went there really because they were still known at the time as really these great centers for studying European continental philosophy, as opposed to the analytic traditions that were the mainstay at most state institutions. And that's what interested me. So I did that. I would then actually went to St. Louis University, which is a Jesuit university in St. Louis. I had a professor there who was a Habermasian. Um, James Bowman was his name. So just became increasingly immersed in political thought and European political thought. And so decided that I would venture to Germany and did my doctorate there. So that's the kind of philosophical trajectory in a way from this little town. And I don't know, what was the other question you asked?
Well, no, it's a fascinating journey and one that I can in some way relate to for sure. And when you did your PhD in Germany, I'm just curious, was it in German? Did you have to learn German and to what degree?
Yeah, I mean, I've now translated a couple books from German. I mean, my German is quite good. I translated for Cambridge University Press a book called Naturalistic Hermeneutics by Chris Matsavinos, and then a book for Columbia University Press, Media of Reason by Matthias Vogel. So I did learn German, but I didn't have to write in German. So, I mean, I wrote for some of my classes, I wrote some of my classwork in German, but my dissertation I was able to write in English. Even Germans often write now their dissertations in English just to expand their audience.
Yeah.
And there's a whole little niche of jobs related to that. So actually, after I did my doctorate in Germany, I started working for a Max Planck Institute that was doing research on collective goods. And it was an institute for political scientists, economists, and lawyers. And so I was basically in that job, I was reading papers continually from people in those areas on collective goods problems. Environmental problems and so on. So anyway, there's a whole little marketplace for English over there because more and more scholars from around the world. That institute had people from the Netherlands, from Belgium, from Germany, sometimes from France, but who all came there and studied and then would write in English that needed improved. So sometimes I found myself rewriting papers, sometimes lightly revising them, sometimes translating them.
Do you think that helped your own writing skills by doing those kind of editorial?
Well, one thing it did was put me in contact with some pretty savvy scholars who were really great at writing book prospectuses and things like that. And yeah, I'm sure it helped me write better.
And then how did you end up then in Miami?
I just came back to the States. I got jobs in Colorado initially. I decided to come back home just to try to work full-time in philosophy. And I got a job at Colorado State University Pueblo, and then from there, University of Colorado, Colorado Springs. And then I was applying for jobs. I came originally to Miami to work at St. Thomas University, a Catholic university, kind of like the one I went to for my undergrad degree. And I was a full professor there. I even was an interim dean while at that institution. So the problem was they basically got a new president who was taking a hard right wing turn. They were trying to, they were asking for people to retire and so on. It just wasn't a hospitable place for me, where I could do the kinds of things that I do believe in. I'm a cultural Catholic, you could say, as far as that's a part of my upbringing, background, and so on. And I mean, I find a lot of value in, Michael Harrington and that kind of social justice wing of Catholicism. And I found at that institution, they had really good engaged pedagogy projects. I mean, we were taking students to the Coalition of Immokalee Workers, which I don't know if you know that organization, but they've won, MacArthur Genius Grant for the work that they've been doing, organizing farm workers, organizing basically, and going to going to private companies and negotiating for 1 penny per pound more for tomatoes that would go directly to the farm workers, renegotiating for better working conditions for the farmers. And we were able to take students and expose them to these kinds of activists. And then we also had some projects in Haiti that were quite exciting. We were working basically partners with a Haitian coffee cooperative. And our students went there and they studied beetle bugs, you know, to figure out what kind of traps they might make to capture the beetle bugs that were destroying the crops of some of the Haitian farmers. We put the Haitian farmers in contact with local, with a local coffee company. Students were learning about what a cooperative is, because it was a cooperative we were working with and so on. So there were those exciting kinds of things that I signed on to there, all been really more or less shut down since I left there. I left there and I put my feelers out for local jobs, and there were 4 open, a wild thing for philosophy, 4 open at Miami-Dade College, and I applied and I got one of them, and I've come into a place that's really dynamic in its own right. It has a different kind of mission. What it doesn't allow me is as much free time for the research that I was kind of able to continue while even in that pretty heavy teaching situation that I was in. But what it does have are so outreach to communities that are very, very fascinating. They've got, we've got a center for Institute for Civic Engagement and Democracy, an environmental ethics center, lots of possibilities to do things for grants. So, last year I had a grant on art activism with the MacArthur Foundation.
Wow.
And so I was able to bring in local artists who are doing activist art and get them to, talk to our students about how art, about their own art and about the issues related to that. So, I mean, this institution offers a lot of possibilities for the kind of activism I do is engaged pedagogy. I mean, that's mostly what I do. I do go and support the Coalition of Immokalee Workers and these other things, and I try to get students aware of these movements and involved in them in some way as an educator.
And do you take as your critical pedagogy, like someone like a Paulo Freire? Does he register in your, or who are the key figures?
Yeah, actually, so I was the dean the one year, and I vowed to myself to finish reading that book finally the year before I became dean. And the idea was, it's a great thing if you can become an academic administrator and actually have some influence. The problem was, and the reason I stepped down immediately was, there was administration there that didn't want an academic dean to say anything, but wanted, was looking for some foot soldiers. I was one of 4 deans to step down. I mean, I got the job and I almost immediately, I stayed my 1 year, but it was a very hostile work environment. And that's the problem too. So going back to the education in America situation, you have not only a culture that is completely disseminating disinformation, but that disinformation has been bought by a lot of boards of trustees of colleges. I mean, these folks are from real estate. They don't have backgrounds and they don't have backgrounds in education. A lot of them couldn't tell you what a public good is and why, they can't differentiate a public good and some kind of a provision of that from a business good. So they like the business model in education. That was the situation I found myself in as a dean, and it simply became, it was clear it was useless to try to be a dean unless you were going to basically be the fist that pounded down on people and, tried to advance your own career for some petty reason, which didn't interest me in the least. So so I moved out and moved on. And I'm looking for, and happy about opportunities there are in education at places like Miami-Dade College. But throughout the country, there are these institutes for civic engagement. There's this focus on engaged pedagogy, and Ferreira. I read. I mean, they're not. That book is something a lot of people in those centers have read and are familiar.
Like the pedagogy of the oppressed or something like that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, how do you do that in North Miami? I mean, North Miami has a lot of heavy African-American population. Miami itself, the demographic is quite fascinating. It's 60% varieties of Hispanic, 20% Afro-Caribbean, Afro-American, 20% Caucasian. So you do have this, ethnic diversity that's quite interesting. Now, a lot of the populations, like the Cuban population, the Venezuelan populations here, are very, very conservative, very right wing. But you do that, you put ideas out. There's a lot of resistance to, I've had resistance to even my bringing up the name of Karl Marx in my classes. I teaching political philosophy, I had Cuban students at my former university who wouldn't even come to the lessons where I taught Marx, like lessons in political philosophy or so on. So there are challenges in this context, and there are huge challenges in higher education, partially because what we're seeing is generally a move for the commercialization, privatization of it in some sense. Biden has a plan for free community college, free college in the United States for families earning $125,000 or less. Now, if he doesn't have 50 senators, he won't be able to move on that plan. If he does, you get something. Now, that's still going to be an education system that downplays the humanities, downplays the liberal arts, and the democratic function of higher education. Which is sad, but it's something. It's at least making some of those things more accessible, since you don't have to go to debtor prison to study philosophy and literature.
Yeah, that's right. Wow. And it sounds amazing. Like I lived for, I don't know, maybe 6.5 years in just north of you, a couple hours in Orlando, when I was at Rollins College. And it was Rollins is a nice liberal arts college, but it just, for me, it was, I was more at home with talking about different topics than the ones that I think that culture around Rollins talks about. And there's no judgment on that culture. It's just that I was more into thinking through, like you are, different ways that human beings can work together, and rather than stratifying a society and
right.
putting the most vulnerable in more vulnerable positions. So, and I think that's part of where although I'm not a practicing Christian, but I still find that version of Christianity where, or any religion really is, we only are as good as how we deal and take care of the most vulnerable around us, including ourselves in some way, but others. And if we treat the most vulnerable as less than we want to be treated, then that doesn't seem like a good recipe, for a healthy society. If you don't treat people the way they should be. But yeah, you also are a thinker through the environment, and I think you wrote a song about.
Maybe I should play that before our time runs out.
Yeah, that sounds great. I would love to hear it. And what's the title? And when did you write?
This is called Change is Gonna Come. I guess I'll try to point this down toward the guitar a little bit.
Change is gonna come. Okay, good.
So this is inspired in part by Greta Thunberg. Living in the age of the great extinctions. Living in the age of the ocean rising. Living in the age of technological defamation. We need a revolution. Heed the signs of the times. Change is gonna come. Change is on its way. Change is gonna come. Because the house is on fire and we've got to make a change. 14,000 species dying year after year. The Amazon has filled the planet's lungs real. We need 5 Earths to sate our thirst. This bubble's bound to burst. Heed the signs of the times. Change is gonna come. Change is on its way. Change is gonna come. 'Cause the house is on fire and we've got to make a change. Trump rolls back the EPA. Rubio and Scott help him denying climate change. We need 5 Earths to sate our thirst. This bubble's bound to burst. Heed the signs of the times. Change is gonna come. Change is on its way. Change is gonna come. 'Cause the house is on fire and we've got to make a change. We've got to make a change. 'Cause the house is on fire. The house is on fire.
Darrell Arnold performing song, beautiful, wow, and powerful. That's
incredible. Well, you know, that shows you the power of a young activist. You know, Greta Thunberg, on her own, decided to go to this municipal building to start to protest, saying, "Why should I go to school? You're robbing me of my future." And this blossomed into an international movement that is still, you know, growing and has potential for this young generation, you know. And so what can we as educators do, you know, is what I ask myself in my situation, to just expose our students to these issues. I mean, the challenge is daunting because, you know, I mentioned Rubio and Scott in there. I talked about him earlier. Trump, these folks, they deny anthropogenic cause climate change. It's unbelievable. And it's demagoguery, you know, to refuse basically evidence-based thinking in politics is to damn your democracy to demagoguery. And that's what we've seen. And so how can we, though, light young students up with the desire for knowledge and for evidence-based thinking?
Yes.
And compassion for, you know, like you were mentioning, compassion for the people who are, you know, on the border in cages, yep, or in our own community being deported, or for, you know, I don't know, the earth more generally. I mean, that think about the billions of years of information that's basically being snuffed out with every extinction. And we have, you know, maybe up to 14,000 of these a year, according to E.O. Wilson from Harvard. We don't know exactly how many, but we do know it's more than we've seen in, you know, since the dinosaurs went extinct, and we're in this 6th grade extinction. And I think, you know, this is the real issue of our times. This is the issue of the 21st century, and where that's where my own research on technology and so on intersects with the environment, right? You have typically these environmental or these technological optimists. They're looking at the beautiful things that happen with technology, like prosthetics, right? Somebody can get an arm that didn't have an arm. I mean, there are real clear benefits to that. I mean, the information sharing that we can do in this format is a very helpful thing. Sure. But when you look at, you know, when you look at the planetary level and what these technologies are doing, then, you know, you have some room for skepticism about, you know, what we're doing, and what we have and see is this imperative to make better, you know, more sustainable technologies to design our cities I mean,
Yes.
all these human built objects. I mean, if there's some part of my research that I really take into my teaching and try to form it around, it's this idea that there's this whole human built world is not separate from this natural world, but but it's a part of it. And this has been what I've been researching for 15 years or so, and writing about and teaching.
Mm,
And so how do we create these human built objects
absolutely.
and these spaces, these human spaces,
Mhm.
so that they, for now, at least do much less harm or eventually, are sustainable.
Yes.
And so I do think that's the call of our age for researchers, for educators. And so that's where my passion lies. And that's all in that song as well.
Yeah, and I just really admire how organic your life is on the level of an educator, as a professor, but also as a musician. And it just seems like the task before us is sometimes so daunting that people can just give up because it just sounds like a Debbie Downer. It just sounds, oh, it's constantly, it's how bad it is,
Right.
and this can turn
Right.
people off quickly rather than what it should do is light up another part of the brain to say,
Right.
okay, it might be bad, but I'm still alive. Because I'm alive, we can do something. And
Yeah.
to switch that is a really difficult, it's super close. I mean, it's not a long leap, in fact, but to be able to make that register. And I think educators like you do that in your music. What a beautiful song. In fact, Greta sailed across the Atlantic in November this time last year, and oops, some reason my timer went off. And when she was doing that, she sailed on a sailboat called Le Vagabond, and the skipper on that was Nikki Henderson, and I know Nikki. Nikki's lectured for us, and so Nikki and Greta, are friends, and I would love to share that song through Nikki to potentially Greta. So it
Oh,
would
cool.
it would be really. I think it's powerful, and I like the blues side. Would you call it the blues? Is that the kind of
Yeah,
genre you play in?
that's a blues song. Yeah.
Okay, well, forgive me, I'm not that savvy with music so much, but yeah, wow, it's very powerful. I just really appreciate who you are, and I admire your podcast, the Raven Speaks, your blog, which is really insightful. And I admire you and Sarah, what you both are doing together, dancing in the streets the other day. So that was really good.
Yeah, you've got to celebrate, where you have a victory, you've got to celebrate it. And that's the whole thing. It's very easy to have the wind taken out of your sails because there's so much that's daunting, right? But there are little victories, and I think it's important to celebrate them. And what you're doing with GCAS is really phenomenal. I mean, you're bringing together the possibility for a global education, right?
We're doing
People
it.
from around the world who can gather and share ideas and study critical theory in a way that is really unique here, where you have that as your mission of your education. And so I've been really very grateful to participate in so many of your talks and to be involved with GCAS. So you're in a more central place that filters out to people doing little work around the world. Little work, playing, fostering venues of music where people are able to create a song and take it out and play it, to read a poem, for students to think a little bit more critically about the environment and the cultural norms that we're immersed in. I mean, that's what I do here. That's the simple work I do in Miami, and I'm happy to be networked into GCAS in some way with your the excellent pedagogy that you're making available
Together
around the world.
It's a step, and just just connecting with you and Sarah, that to me is like that positive. It's it is daunting, it's tough, the world where we are, but just those connections and building those connections up together, I think can turn the switch around, at least in micro ways, and potentially in larger ways too. So Darrell, it's been a real pleasure talking with you. And, we've actually never met, even though
Right.
we've been in different, we know a lot of the same people. And one day you and Sarah and I and others will be celebrating. And I don't
We'll,
know
we'll,
what about, but we'll do it.
we'll manage that.
That sounds great. Thank you
All
so
right,
much.
Creston. Thanks a lot. Have a
Thank
good
you.
one.
Hold on one second. I'm just gonna. Okay. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and we really appreciate your time and your efforts. And if you feel like you want to help support what we do, we have a Patreon, and you can chip in a couple bucks there. Really, really appreciate it. Okay. We wish you the very best, and take care of yourself. And remember, not one person can do everything, but everybody can do something. Let's do it together.